And the Browns go in and score again.
4 touchdown passes on the day, and we're not even at halftime.
Throws right side and picked off. They got it down the sideline. It's Denzel Ward. He's to the 35, 40. He's to the 50. He's to the 40, 30, 20, 15, 10, 5. Touchdown. A pick six. Denzel Ward is back. On the right side to Chubb. Chubb over the 50. Chubb to the 45. Chubb to the 40. Down the sideline 30, 25, 20, 15, 10, 5. There he goes. Touchdown. Nick Chubb.
Yes, it is the end of the Cleveland Browns season. A disappointing end to it once all is said and done. A 14-28 loss to the Pittsburgh Steelers at Pittsburgh. It was not enough, however, to put the Steelers over the line for the playoffs. The Miami Dolphins were able to do just enough on their end. And I mean just enough. If you haven't seen the highlights for that one, don't. Honestly, it was a terrible, terrible game. But at the very least, they were able to come on top at 11 points to 6 over there. A true football aficionados game, that one. It was one for the diehards. And to be quite honest, it was one for the diehards with the Browns as well. Shaun, let's go to you first. But what we're going to do is just have a quick chat about this, and then we'll take a look at the season in general and what we need to do for next season. You know, taking a look at yesterday's game, I know you were one of the ones that watched its entirety, probably more out of duty than anything else. But what did you make of it?
Yeah, I've tried to be positive, Pete, most weeks on here, but God, it was a tough watch yesterday. It was a really, really tough watch. Outside of possibly one decent drive, I thought it was very, very, very difficult to watch yesterday. Not a great deal of positivity, if we're being honest, to come out of it. You know, we said that these last few games were all just around getting Deshaun Watson's ring rust off, getting him some reps, all of that kind of stuff. There were multiple issues yesterday. He, I think by nature, holds on to the ball. We'll probably talk about what the outlook looks like for next season. I think part of being a playmaker is he's going to hold on to the ball longer than people possibly want him to, because that's part of his makeup. He wants to extend plays. He wants to, sort of get his receivers the opportunity to make a big play. But with that comes, the potential for more sacks to be a problem. 7 times he was sacked yesterday. The offensive line looks a shell of what it started out this season. I don't think Wyatt Teller's looked right since he's come back. Again, didn't particularly play great yesterday. Poor old James Hudson seems to only ever get called up to try and take on TJ Watt, which most Premier right tackles struggle with, let alone James Hudson. So that was a swinging door on that side. And Jedrick Wills' poor season culminated in another poor performance, ultimately with an injury at the end of it as well. Hopefully that's not too bad. But obviously a disappointing day at the office, whichever way you want to dress it up. There wasn't a great deal of positivity come out of it. Sort of, minor highlights, if you like. Myles Garrett tying the franchise record in terms of sacks on the season. He's had another stellar campaign. Obviously, Batman can fly without his Robin. I'm sure we'll talk about that a little bit throughout the course of the evening. And Cade York made 2 out of 2 kicks. So Cade York didn't miss yesterday. So let's take some positives, because there were very, very few to take whatsoever, unfortunately, yesterday.
I like that you stayed on brand at the end there. You were still able to keep your positivity going, even through one of the darkest hours there. One of the positives, of course, as well, is the 4th place schedule. We were saying last week that we'd be very happy with a 51-50 loss and the Dolphins or the Patriots winning, just to keep the Steelers out of the playoffs as well. Owain, you were the one that coined that one. How do you feel? How do you feel with the aftermath of that performance?
Yeah, pretty terrible, to be fair. I think Shaun summed it up pretty well there. It was a real tough watch yesterday. We all wanted to see offensive explosion yesterday out of us, just throw a bit of caution to win. But yeah, it was a tough one to watch. The offense was obviously okay for parts, but Deshaun Watson made some, a couple of terrible decisions, which, really cost us the game yesterday. And, going forward, I know, there's plenty of talk on social media about, some of the throws he made, and, he was better than Kenny Pickett yesterday. But going forward, like, you can't be comparing Deshaun Watson, someone we've paid 230 million to, giving up 3 first-round picks, all of this, sold your soul effectively, morally for this trade as well. You can't sort of compare him to Baker Mayfield, who you would have had on a rookie deal. I know he was a first overall pick, but you can't compare him to Baker. You can't compare him to Kenny Pickett. It's got to be, you're comparing him to the likes of Patrick Mahomes, because that's, on the field, that's where he needs to be for the amount that you've given up for him. And, we've seen very, very little to make us believe that he's going to be anywhere near Patrick Mahomes at the moment. And, that has its concerns, I think. I was always in the camp that, I know we're going to talk about the season in review a little bit later, but I was always in the camp that he was going to be rusty coming in, and that expectations were a little bit too high. But even I'm struggling to see 6.5 games in what this is going to look like going forward. And I think, there's major questions to be asked, because as much as, everyone will point to us getting a new DC and some new defensive players through the door in the summer, and that should translate to wins. This team going forward is going to be very much about the offense, and there's some serious question marks about, more than just the quarterback. There's serious question marks about the wide receivers, serious question marks about the depth that we have at tight end. There's serious question marks about the way this offensive line, which has been invested in so heavily, serious question marks about how these positions are playing. So, in terms of yesterday, it was kind of a sour one to go out on, because now you're left, over this whole off season with that in your memory as the last time you've seen your Cleveland Browns play. And yeah, there's some concerns there for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that I'm more than happy to kickstart on the Watson issues, simply because of the fact that during that first half, it seemed like we were finally getting somewhere. This was the first half that I thought, okay, here we go. He was staying in the pocket a bit more. He was making into guys in space. The plays were actually being made for what you were talking about last week, Owain, but getting guys out in space where he can quickly get it out. And you can tell that the balls being thrown were good. They were, it was calm. It was efficient football, but also you could tell that there was something about those throws. With about 5 minutes to go in the first half, I mean, that interception towards the end of the second quarter, throwing into triple coverage, I think it was going to, who's number 18? Is number 18 Woods?
David Bell.
Yeah, my bad. David Bell, who isn't known for, contested catches or height. He you could tell that he was going to get out-muscled by any of those, let alone all three. And he ends up being underthrown and given to the first guy anyway, and that was the start. You could tell then that he didn't want to throw anything risky after that. He didn't want to throw, period. He kept looking for the ways to try and sidestep the oncoming D-line, this being obviously the best D-line in football, judging by their sack stats, etc. this season. But, the elusive Deshaun Watson, we have not really seen for 6 weeks anyway, and he got well found out in that second half in any case. So, yeah, troubling, I would say. And it's something which I've been on watch on, probably at the detriment of, allowing the process to play out for the last few weeks. I know you both have sort of talked me down at some point, but in terms of looking at next season, I don't know about you two, but the amount of change required, from what we saw today to September 2023 is vast, and I'm unsure if a summer does that.
Look, you were looking, like I say, in these last 6 games to have reason to be optimistic. You know, we all hoped that we might be in some sort of playoff contention, that Deshaun Watson potentially could come back and, you know, be the difference maker and get you over the hump. You know, in reality and in hindsight, that was never going to be the case in terms of those levels of expectation. The thing is, however, and Owain summed it up beautifully, you know, let's stop comparing him to Baker Mayfield, which is what everybody seems to be obsessed with doing. He does need to be compared to Patrick Mahomes. He needs to be compared to Josh Allen. Dare I say it, more closer to home, he needs to be compared to Joe Burrow, because if we're going to start doing things and winning this division, he's going to have to beat Joe Burrow on a consistent basis. That's the biggest challenge. Yes, Mahomes and Josh Allen when you get playoff time, but, you know, winning this AFC North is a difficult task. Every team in the division again this year finishes with a winning record, apart from the Cleveland Browns. If it hadn't have been for some last-second field goals, 3 of the teams would have been in the playoffs, which is unbelievable when you consider where the Steelers came from. And like you say, that is with a rookie quarterback who was much maligned coming out of the draft process. You know, and starting off the season, don't forget, 2-6. You know, we'd all written off the Steelers as having the first losing season under Tomlin. We were talking about them having a top 5 or top 10, and certainly draft pick. And like I say, they're a matter of moments away from reaching the postseason. So this division is difficult enough. He needs to come on leaps and bounds. There hasn't been an awful lot that's been there that has given you reason for optimism. The reality is, and we said this last week, it needs to work. It can't be a case of we want it to work. It needs to work. And I would suggest everybody is on the hot seat for this working. And I would go all the way through Andrew Berry, Kevin Stefanski, the whole lot are all on the hot seat for this to work. You've seen a full season of Russell Wilson in Denver and what they paid, you know, in terms of a comparable sort of haul, if you like, in terms of giving up a multitude of picks, supposedly for a top quarterback, and giving him a load of guaranteed money. You know, that hasn't worked out at all. That's with a full season. That's without any off-field issues, etc., etc. You know, this needs to work, because otherwise the franchise is going to be pushed back an awful long way. I would suggest what's happened today and the way it's been trending, I think it was always a case of, rightly or wrongly, certain people were getting a bit of a pass and a buy in terms of what happened this year. And certainly at the back end of the year, I always have said that Kevin Stefanski will be back, because I think he deserves the opportunity to work a full season with his quarterback of choice. But it needs to work next year. It's as simple as that. As much as we've given him lots of praise on this podcast for the work he did with Jacoby Brissett earlier on in the season, as much as he should be rightly praised for the work that he did with Baker Mayfield in his first year as the Cleveland Browns head coach, you know, I think this year upcoming, this is the one now that matters, because this is the decision that you've made to hopefully turn your franchise around. It needs to work. It needs to be an awful lot better. And I would suggest there is going to be quite an awful lot of transition on both sides of the ball, as Owain alluded to. I look at the depth chart, and to be honest, we'll probably do this in a subsequent podcast, so I'm not going to go through it line by line.
I was going to say we will go through that in turn, probably in a couple of weeks' time, more than anything else. But you're right, there is going to be a lot of transition.
Yeah, I would suggest, even if it's people in backup positions and depth positions, I reckon you could see as many as 10 or 12 different names on both sides of the ball in terms of on the depth chart at various positions. Not necessarily starters, but even from a depth perspective, I think there needs to be that much of an injection of new talent across a multitude of positions. So I don't think the sky's falling. Don't get me wrong. I think the core and the base is pretty good, but there certainly needs to be a lot of additions. But ultimately, it'll boil down to how good the quarterback is or isn't, as it always invariably does.
Yeah. Okay, I tell you what. Let's let's take a bit more of a round view of stuff which has happened over the last few days. First of all, because a lot has happened. Let's start back on, I want to say it was Wednesday or Thursday. Jadeveon Clowney essentially puts himself out there and says that he's 95% sure that he's not coming back. the long and short of it being that he was given the Robin role to Garrett's Batman. Garrett was played in much more favourable positions. Didn't like the way that he was being treated at the Browns. I assume by the coaching staff, because he then alluded to if certain people weren't around, then maybe he could be back. Myles Garrett then shoots across saying that he's looking for volunteers, not, what was it? Volunteers, not hostages, I think it was, and that he wasn't sure as to whether or not, wasn't sure as to why Clowney says that Garrett was in more favourable conditions matchups, considering that he's been double covered the entire year, another year of Garrett being either double covered or held, as we saw on Full Show yesterday as well. So that one sort of ended up in a massive sort of like issue, and I do take that as a way of not managing your players as well. John Johnson said in a dressing room chat after the game yesterday that the main issue has been trying to get players to play and players to be able to come together and actually play for the team, so that has been a massive issue. And then this morning, America wakes up to the news, not us. It would have been about lunchtime our time, but that Joe Woods has been relieved of his duties, is how Tom Pelissero put it. I think that if the public of Cleveland had their way, they would have actively thrown him into the lake if they could. Considering as to just how much of an outpouring there was for his eventual sacking. So Joe Woods has left the ball club, and we are now where we are. Now, I look at all of that from a defensive standpoint, and I think, well, two or three things. One, we're going to see something completely different happen here now from a coaching perspective. According to tweets of which Tom Pelissero and Ian Rappaport have put out, the Browns have requested permission for Patriots defensive assistant Jared Mayo and also for Brian Flores to interview for the defensive coordinator position. I look at Brian Flores as the potential there. There's whispers around Dolphins fans as well that Brian Flores already has a job lined up, pretty much. So, that sort of tells you a lot. Is it with the Browns? I don't know, but there's something to be said there. If so, I consider that a massive upgrade. There is also in the last 10 minutes, the Browns have put in a request to interview Seahawks associate head coach for defense, Sean Desai, for the DC job as well. So there's already a number of names going into the hat. Owain, me just listing that off, the issues of which the defense seems to have just with personnel, the fact that a Joe Woods defense seems to take about 2 months to actually bake before it's ready. Mid-season, all the rest of it, all the trials and tribulations, obviously taking the injuries and the rush defense out of it. I don't think you can put too much into that at this for these conversations. But is this a positive step for, looking at the names and what they're looking to do? Is this showing that there is some light here on the defensive side of the ball?
Yeah, I think so. And looking at the list of names so far, they all seem to be relatively young. I know Flores is probably the most experienced candidate you're looking at out of the names that have been announced already, but he's still only 41. So I think there's obviously been an emphasis on some young DCs that bring some fresh ideas. I do think that Flores is going to be the one that Browns fans seem to cling to, I would imagine, out of the names so far. But I think it would be brave if they go for him, and I say that because sometimes I think in those situations, Flores has been a head coach already. I think he'll want another crack at being a head coach, in the next few years. I think it's a tiny bit risky that he goes in there and maybe his leadership style slightly undermines Kevin Stefanski in a way. There's got to be a hierarchy there between Kevin Stefanski and Flores, and from what we see in the press and hear about the both of them, he seems to be a bit of a stronger character than Kevin Stefanski, which would worry me in the sense that dynamic may affect things. But they do need someone strong. You talked about the Clowney incident there. There seems to be a recurring theme over the last couple of years where something will blow up in the media and then players will get sent home. They'll be sitting out of drives or whatever, which is a little bit concerning. Personally, I think John Johnson speaks an awful lot in the media and brings up these points consistently, and you sort of think, okay, well, how about you keep that in-house for a change and maybe affect things within the organization instead of airing the dirty laundry at every possible opportunity, which he seems to do. So I think accountability needs to go to the players as much as it does on the staff. I think Woods has obviously paid for 3 really bad starts this season, and I agree with that. I do quite like the sound of them going after someone from the Seahawks organization, though, because it's a really stable organization. Obviously, Pete Carroll leads the defense from that head coaching position, so I'd imagine he's been able to impart a lot of wisdom on the defensive staff that he's sort of developed. I think you only have to look at this season in terms of what they've been able to get out of 2 late round rookies at corners in Kobe Bryant and the best one, his name's eluding me a little bit, Tyreek Woolen, sorry, who's as of yesterday was joint leader in interceptions for the season as a rookie. I think he was a 4th rounder as well, if I'm not mistaken. So someone like that I think would excite me a bit. Someone who's been in an organization like the Seahawks, which is historically good defensively. And I think, I do think, as much as maybe we're going to be a little bit pessimistic on this podcast today because of what's gone on in the last, months, but I don't think the defense is a million miles away. I think a new coordinator and a couple of defensive tackles, and I think this defense isn't a million miles away from being something, pretty good.
Yeah, I'd agree with you there. And I looked to the last 6 games pretty much. Ever since Watson's come in and points have come at a premium on offense, the defense has kind of stepped up and made sure that the goal hasn't been that big to try and cover. Even when you look at the Bills game, when you look at the Bucks game, when you look at the Bengals game in the first half as well, the defense is actively getting you the ball back, which is, if you're looking to be very invested in your offense and with an elite passer, you're basically looking for a defense that gives you the ball back more than you give them the ball back. And, there's definitely enough on that defense to do it. We saw it again yesterday, up till a certain point when they then started to break down and lose the wheels a bit. And part of that is because they get given too many possessions as well. This is definitely more about the way in which the defenses start a season rather than finish a season. This is why I think that Joe Woods has actually been able to stick around for 3 years, because of the fact that you can have the rose-tinted glasses of the defense actually looks all right. If we can just carry this into the start of next season, then all good. But Joe Woods has proven that he can't get a defense ready for September. It's sort of a case of, it's almost as if they don't have a preseason. They sort of just come in September, start to go through the paces, and then by about November they sort their shit out. But obviously we need something different there, so I don't disagree with you on that. One thing of which I will sort of raise is you bring up about John Johnson talks a lot. I think a lot of the defensive players talk a lot. I think the defensive players talk a hell of a lot more than the offensive players. To me, that shows that you don't have a guy in there, a coach in there, leaders in there that have that respect. I think that there is a respect issue in that locker room. And hopefully, by having a new coordinator in there, and one of which garners the respect, that should start to clear itself up. Because, I look at Clowney's comments, I see that as partly his personality, and I see that as him, there being a question about the coaching, because surely, you keep that in house. If you have a coach you can go to and talk about these things. I look at the stuff of which Garrett has said, he's supposed to be a leader on this team. He doesn't seem to be nurtured or mentored in the right way to keep that stuff in house. John Johnson flagging off every 5 minutes. At some point I have to look to the supervisor. While the workers are talking this, that, and the other, I have to look at the supervisor and say, what are you doing to keep an eye on this? What are you doing to stop and rest this, that, and the other? It just seems to be a hell of a lot, and all coming through one guy.
Yeah, look, it needs an overhaul. There's no doubt about that. It's felt as though this has been inevitable since the midpoint of the season. We kind of talked about it, and I think Owain sort of summed it up beautifully when there was real sort of momentum behind the Fire Joe Woods campaign mid-season that, look, this is going to happen. It'll happen at the end of the season because that'll be your scapegoat for anything that does or doesn't go wrong for the remainder of the season. I think Joe Woods gave a press conference the other week and he felt like a beaten man at that stage. So, I don't think today's news is going to have surprised Joe Woods. I don't think it surprised anybody particularly. In terms of who they bring in, look, I'm not particularly fussed, to be completely honest. I'm not somebody that's particularly interested in a certain type of person. I think everybody, and I don't know if this is just a really old-fashioned way that people look at it, people seem to be obsessed by wanting somebody to be on the sideline shouting and bawling all the time. Why? I've got no idea why. I couldn't care less if somebody shouts some balls or not. All I want is that if 43 is the guy in coverage, that he runs with the guy. I don't care whether the defensive coordinator is on the side shouting and bawling at him if he does or he doesn't do it. Ultimately, that play's been and gone. I want the guy lined up in the right place to start with, so I couldn't really care less on the guy's makeup. And I think, and this is where Stefanski has his detractors, because people see him as somebody that's a bit calmer, a bit more composed, doesn't necessarily rant and rave. I saw a comment today on Twitter, and it's like, Stefanski should have been all over the referees for the missed face mask on Deshaun Watson, but he was too busy calling the next play. And I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, what difference is it going to make if he gets in the referee's face, shapes some balls? What it's going to do is cost his team 15 yards, and he's still going to have to call a play anyway. So I just don't understand that mentality that some people have got. I just think that it needs some fresh perspective. I think there is some talent in there, particularly in the secondary. We've talked about that enough. I think, you've got a good core there with Ward. Delpit's been good at the back end of the season. Newsom, I thought, had a bit of a rough game yesterday, to be honest, but I think he's shown enough that that's somebody that you'd want to keep around and build around. Martin Emerson, we've commented enough on as having a pretty decent rookie season. So there's certainly some talent there. I am worried about the line, I'll be honest. I mean, I'm really not concerned about Jadeveon Clowney. As far as I'm concerned, goodbye, good riddance. I don't think it's necessarily been a experiment that certainly worked, not in year two. He had a fairly reasonable year, his first year here. But this year, it just hasn't worked. We can dress it up whichever way we want to. But if you look at the production from Jadeveon Clowney, he managed 10 games out of the 17. So he's, not been available for half of them. Well, that's everybody's first great ability, is their availability. He's not there half the time. He's mustered a grand total of 2 sacks, 4 quarterback hits, and 4 tackles for loss. That's the sort of impact plays, if you like, from a guy that we paid $10 million for this year. Myles Garrett, just out of interest in comparison, 16 sacks, 18 tackles for loss, as well as 26 quarterback hits. You're talking chalk and cheese when it comes to the level of production. So I think there's an awful lot that does need to be done. I don't think we can underestimate how young some of these pieces are. We forget that JOK is still a young player. He's obviously missed the last few games on IR. JOK is a young piece in that linebacking core. There's so many youngsters on the defensive line whether it be Perrion Winfrey, who's come on towards the back end of the season. I'm not saying he's going to be anything special, but he certainly at least showed you some promise in the back half of the season. Similarly with Alex Wright, extremely raw. He's obviously going to be a guy that's going to be here again next year. But there's so many young pieces on there. I just think, like I say, there was ultimately going to be a change. It felt inevitable. I think the biggest surprise, to be honest, is that Mike Prefer's not gone as well. I would suggest that he's probably not going to, because I would have assumed they'd have announced them both at the same time if they were going to also move on from Prefer. But like I say, in terms of individual names, like I say, I'm not particularly fussed. You have to trust that the guys get the right person in. If there are any sort of personality clashes, you have to hope that they're understood and recognised before the decision's made in terms of how you're going to manage that moving forward. The other two names that are getting talked about a lot that haven't come out yet are obviously Jim Leonard, who was obviously the most recently the interim coach at Wisconsin. That's a name that's been mentioned quite a lot. You won't obviously hear as to whether or not he's requested for an interview, because he's obviously a free agent, so that might happen anyway. And the other one, which is a bit more old school, is Jim Schwartz, which is a name that's been brought up in the past. I think he's currently, correct me if I'm wrong, gents, I think he's currently sort of with the Titans in some capacity, I believe, but that's a name that's been linked previously as well. So there'll be plenty of names in the mix. Don't get me wrong, but like I say, ultimately, it doesn't matter who the coordinator is, and I'm really sorry for everybody that's massively been in the Fire Joe Woods fan club all year. Doesn't matter who comes in. We're not all of a sudden going to have a dominant defensive tackle. Whoever's the next defensive coordinator through the door, there needs to be an influx of personnel. They need to be lucky with injuries next year, and these things tend to even themselves out. I mean, the linebacker core has just been absolutely obliterated this year, which is incredibly unlucky. But when you consider that the linebacking core yesterday, consisted of Jermaine Carter, Reggie Ragland, it's quite unbelievable, really, when you think about the amount of turnover that we've had at that position. And Tony Fields has gone from a special teamer to a starter basically because of injuries. So it's a totally different looking unit to what it was. But hopefully, whoever the new DC is, I think they'll get an opportunity to obviously make sure that they get things in place. And in terms of John Johnson, I think that'll be the last time you hear him speaking as a Cleveland Brown. To be honest, I'll be very surprised if John Johnson is brought back. And I think, as you guys both rightly said there, it's frustrating and disappointing when somebody that was brought in as a marquee free agent that has got a bit of experience around him is the type of player that, like you say, he seems very intent on airing his dirty laundry in public as opposed to being a difference maker and putting these things right, doesn't he? So I don't think he'll be sorely missed by anybody if he ends up leaving as well.
Yeah. Okay, so let's take a look then at next season. We might as well. We are now very firmly looking at 2023 as a whole. Being last in the division has its advantages, as Browns fans will know. It's more about capitalizing on them. At least we have a good first-round draft pick. Oh, wait, sorry. Never mind that. At least we have a good second-round draft pick. How many draft picks back are we in that second round? Does anybody know off the top of their head?
I think it's about 10, isn't it?
I think it's slightly more than 13. I think I heard yesterday, but yeah, it's not ideal.
We are
but
middle of the park then.
yeah, look, it's not ideal.
My goodness. Okay, so 13th pick in the second round then. So still a ways back, but that it's a lot better than what it would have been, which I think would have been about 16 or 17 with the win yesterday, which would not have helped matters at all. Also, slightly easier schedule. We have the Bears and the Jets at home rather than the this is where I need stuffing. The Lions and the Patriots. And then away, we have the Broncos instead of the Raiders. So the Russell Wilson, Deshaun Watson matchup, I promise you that will be a primetime game. I firmly believe that in my soul that Browns-Broncos will be a primetime game simply because of Watson versus Wilson. And are either of these quarterbacks actually going to make it work in year two? It just seems written in the stars there. So that's what losing yesterday got us. One thing which I'd like from each of you two is kind of like our main salvo for today. What is your number one thing? I don't want you to be broad. I want you to be quite specific. If it's to recruit a position, I want it very much to be a particular position, not to, for example, run defense doesn't cut it, right? It's going to have to be a particular position. Or if it's about, doing certain things, it's got to be quite specific. What's the one thing that is paramount to you in terms of getting a winning team, a playoff entered team, a contending team for 2023? And I'll start off with Owain, because it's been a while since I've heard your voice.
Yeah, I think mine's going to become a little bit redundant by the time that we get to, free agency and the draft. And my big one is to get another wide receiver and someone that can really make a difference. I think, we've seen over the last few games that we are short of that position, unequivocally. And you look at how teams win in the NFL, and you can have a good defense all you want. Jets have had a great defense this year, but when you can't put up points, you don't win games. So for me, you've made a £230 million investment in a quarterback, and all those draft picks that you've invested in him, don't waste that by having a mediocre group of pass catchers. For me, if you're going to go and do that, do it with the intention of then stocking up a wide receiver, stocking up a tight end. They've already theoretically stocked up at the offensive line position. So for me, go and get, pass catchers that can make a difference, that can make something happen out of nowhere, and really, push to get that average points per game up towards 30, which is going to stand you in real good stead throughout this season, throughout next season, whenever, because it takes a bunch of pressure off the defense. I bet if we went through the last, 2 seasons by scoring, 25 to 30 points a game, I bet our defense looks a whole lot better just purely because the pressure is taken off them then. They're not on the field for, long periods of time trying to, make up for a 3 and out that your offense have just had, or, they're not under pressure to keep the opposing offense to under 20 points, because if they don't, then you've lost the game. So, offense tends to be more of a stable thing in the NFL. It seems to be more stable year on year than defense, more predictive. So invest in the thing that's going to win you games, invest in a wide receiver, and then hopefully, as Watson gets better, that offense gets a whole lot better, and you consistently start winning games. And also, let's call it what it is. It's exciting, isn't it? Like if we went into the draft and drafted a second round wide receiver that you've seen in college go, for over 100 yards in games and rack up touchdowns and do exciting things on the field, you feel a whole lot more excited going into next season if you draft a fat guy to play defensive tackle and you're not going to see him for a year doing anything on the field. So, that's also another little plus if we go that route.
Yeah, no, definitely get that. And on a personal note, though, if we somehow snag Smith and Jigba, I would be, I'd be over the moon, counting down the days to September as to whether or not I'll be able to actually see that day is a completely different kettle of fish. But I live in hope. I've been wanting that now for 2 years. Shaun, how about you, bud?
Yeah, look, I could easily rinse and repeat what's just been said there. I think if the Cleveland Browns are going to do anything in this next 4 to 5 year window that they've tried to create for themselves, it's going to be on the offensive side of the ball. It needs to be because of the way that they've tried to approach it. So I'll flip it slightly. For me, sort of talked about it when we were talking about the defense. I know you said a specific position. I don't know if you'll let me get away with pass rush. Because we managed 34 sacks.
Edge, yeah, I can give you that. I can give you edge or DT, one or the other.
Yeah, whether it be edge, wherever it comes from. We 34 sacks this year for the Cleveland Browns. 16 of those were from Myles Garrett. Can you just imagine if in week 1 of next year, God forbid it happens, but can you imagine in week 1 of next year, Myles Garrett goes down for a prolonged period of time? This defense would be unbearable to watch.
You mean, or if he gets involved in a car accident that ends up pretty
Yeah.
much being close to damaging his life, one of those.
Yeah, look, and that comes back to sort of that responsibility and leadership and all that kind of stuff. Myles needs to take care of his own business off the field, but there's no doubting that he backs it up with his performance on the field, and that's the big difference. He, though, needs some help. You know, if I was to say to you, who was the second leading sack getter on the Cleveland Browns this year, Josh, who would you say it was?
Tevin Bryan.
Yeah, that's probably because you've researched it, but yeah, it is Tevin
Oh,
Bryan.
is it? Is it Tevin Bryan?
Tevin Bryan with 3.
Oh, there's
Tevin
a reason
Bryan
why I
with
host
3.
this show.
Yeah, Tevin Bryan with 3. You know, and to be honest, you know, he's been much maligned this year, but that goes to show the level of problem that we have in terms of the level of pass rush that we have, or indeed have not been able to generate. You know, in comparison, you know, the Philadelphia Eagles, who obviously best record in the league this year, but you know, let's be honest, that's what signing a quarterback and paying him all that guaranteed money, the Browns want to be challenging for the best records in the league. So if we take that as a benchmark, 70 sacks the Philadelphia Eagles this year. 4 separate players have double digits in terms of the amount of sacks for the Philadelphia Eagles this year. You know, so at the end of the day, it's all of the game fundamentally always comes down to the play at the quarterback position, and you want yours to obviously be very good, and you want to do everything you can to ultimately cock up the other team's quarterback position. We haven't been good enough at doing that consistently this year. Teams can game plan for Myles Garrett as best as they can in terms of double teams, triple teams, holds that don't get called, and all the rest of it that people always want to bang on about. All right, it's the NFL, it happens all the time. The reality is it looks very obvious when it's Myles Garrett because he's the only one on our team that generates a pass rush. In theory, if there's 2 or 3 players over there, it should be opening up holes for others to exploit. We need the others to start exploiting them. Because, you know, ultimately it is about complementary football. If we do everything that Owain said in terms of the offense looks better, it sustains drives, it scores more points, the run defense will automatically improve because teams will abandon the run because they've got to throw the ball. If they've got to throw the ball, we need to get after the quarterback. So it'll fundamentally, we make it sound easy, don't we? Everybody's looking for the same formula, you know, but the reality is, like I said, we do need to increase our level of pass rush because, like I say, that for me has been the real glaring weak point of the defense. We talk a lot about the run defense, but you know, ultimately, I don't think it's really done very well in terms of, you know, actually getting after the passer this year. We mentioned Clowney, like I say, 2 sacks compared to, you know, was it 9 or 10? I think he managed it in his season that he was here last year. You know, so that's a significant drop off. You know, but ultimately there needs to be much more contribution right across the board. So pass rush for me would be the area that they would be looking to get some improvement from, whether that be interior defensive line or external in terms of the edge.
Yeah, I'm glad that you brought that one up. It means that you and Owain have sort of taken the 2 main positions of need, really. When you look at the Browns pass, even the Browns rush D, you know, like you say, linebackers should come back. Therefore, a DT would look really nice, and edge would really help out Garrett. And obviously, with the passing offense, you need Deshaun Watson firing in all cylinders. And evidently, you need him to have wide receivers that create separation. We talked on a lot about that last week as well, but it seems even more evident after this week because he just does not seem confident throwing into tight windows. Let's hope that changes. Mine isn't a particular position or even a particular philosophy or anything like that. Mine is actually a lot more, it's simple in nature, but the Browns never do it in practice. And that is just to have a completely calm, obvious, well done off season for once, from the draft all the way through to September. I don't want us to try and do anything quirky to win the off season. I don't want us to draft the one that no one thought about drafting. I don't want us to get into training camp and then realize we got 3 or 4 players down because our conditioning was wrong. I don't want to hear about these off-season stories that end up derailing the locker room. None of it. I want a deliberately calm off season that gets in, because I feel that every year you hear something about the Browns that ends up completely derailing us. Or it sets the wheels in motion. This has to have been the worst off season that we had last year in terms of rocking the boat, and the boat was truly rocked. We couldn't fully prepare with the guy that was actually under center. We ended up giving it to the guy that was going under center in December, and it ended up being pointless anyway. And then you add on to that the fact that you've got no flipping defensive tackles to start the year. You flipping center goes out within one play of the preseason. So mine, it's kind of more for the football gods than anything else, but the front office can definitely help. Just don't make waves. Just make the obvious moves. Get a wide receiver. Sort out your D-line. Trust that everything else works out. And then just have a well thought out preseason. Don't go out and start punching people up. Don't end up doing this, that, and the other. Don't get injured. Just get to September intact, ready to go, like pretty much all other teams do, apart from the Baltimore Ravens, but that's another matter. So that one's mine. I imagine that might bore some people, but considering a Browns preseason, off season in general, it's usually quite an entertaining affair. But I don't care anymore. I want to be thoroughly bored between now and September, please. That is my sincere wish.
I think I can probably guarantee, and even I'm hesitant to do this, but I can probably guarantee it won't be as bad as last off season. I don't think it can be as bad as last off season.
No, it's all right. Greg Williams might come back as DC.
Oh, but he shoots some balls at people, so everyone will love that.
Oh, goodness. Right, that is going to be us for this week, I think. We actually know before we go away, does anybody see any shocks happening in wildcard weekend?
I don't know if it's a shock or not. I've got the Giants to beat the Vikings. I think they match up quite well to the Vikings, and I think the Vikings have fraudulently found themselves with a 13-3 record, or whatever it is they ended up with, 13-4 or 14-3. That's an unbelievable stat, isn't it? Didn't they win every single one of their one-score games? 11. I think they're 11-0 in one-score games, which is just unbelievable. That'll even itself out next year. So I've got the Giants. I've got the Giants winning that one. I think for me, and look, we won't spend too long on it because we're 47 minutes in, but I'll just ask you both a question on it. It's obviously exciting at the back end of the regular season to get this seventh team in, but if you look at the matchups this weekend, they don't exactly look appealing on paper, do they? I think everyone expects the Seahawks to get walloped at the Niners. Everybody expects the Dolphins to get walloped at the Bills. The Ravens, God knows how many the Bengals will actually score when they're actually trying against the Ravens. I think it could be a cricket score. It's not exactly a massively appealing weekend, is it, to be honest? Or is that just me being harsh?
Wayne, do you want to take this one first?
Yeah, I think all but one of the spreads are double-digit spreads. I think I saw earlier, which is really telling for a bunch of playoff games. I think that's quite shocking if you're thinking about it. But no, I agree with you. Some really bad matchups this week. I think the only game that I'm looking at really that makes me excited to watch is the Chargers Jaguars, just because you look at both teams and there's similar level of quality in there. So in terms of getting an even game, that should be the one that's most likely to get there.
Yeah.
But yeah, I suppose having the seventh team makes us a little bit more likely to make the playoffs going forward. So I wouldn't want them to get rid of it, to be honest.
There is that. I also think that this year's an anomaly. I think that this year's been difficult.
It has been a bit difficult this year, and I think scoring's been down this season. Offensive haven't been quite as good this season, which has probably evened the playing field a little bit. Don't think quarterback play has been as good for the most part as what we've seen it in previous years, which is again evened the playing field a little bit. Yeah, we'll see going forward. I do think, looking at the games there could be a couple of absolute blowouts. I expect the Cowboys to absolutely spank the Buccaneers. So yeah, there could be some hefty scoring, hefty one-sided scoring, I should say. Just before we do jump off, I just wanted to pick up something we probably haven't mentioned on this podcast so far today, which is that Glenn Cook seems to be having requests for GM jobs already. Obviously the Titans have come in and requested for his services today or for an interview. So that's encouraging in the sense that if he does go there, then we get another couple of third-round picks, which is also useful. So I think AB he's probably catching some flack in the last week or 2 weeks or whatever about his roster building. But what he's done really well over the last few years is started to develop that coach GM line where obviously Kwesi went last year, gave us 2 third-round picks. Obviously, if Cook goes and gets us 2 third-round picks this season, and Catherine Reich could manage to get us two if she sticks around until next season as well. So that's something that you can look at with real positivity going forward, that he's starting to develop a little line. And it shows you what the NFL thinks of Andrew Berry as well, because if the NFL thought he wasn't any good, then they wouldn't be touching his disciples with a barge pole either. So that's really encouraging to see.
Yeah, no, totally agreed, and that's a really good call out. That is, I do like that. Yeah, just before we go, couple of shout outs. First of all, congrats to David Starr for winning the Cleveland Brits Fantasy League. Was top pretty much throughout the entire thing, and even with the issues surrounding the calling of the end of that game, it was obvious that he was going to win his matchup. We did, however, agree that Rachel Jackson, who was in that final, get a little bit of the prize pot. So congratulations to both of those. In the pick'ems, of which for some reason extends to the postseason now. That never used to happen. I know that is something of which is going to annoy Owain, because he felt like he had to go all or bust this week. Still 4 points ahead in the Cleveland Brits League, at least. So you're still more than in the running for the hat that we're throwing at, that we'll throw at you. So that's something at least, and you still have a chance at getting number 1 overall, mate. You're still in the hunt. You've just got to maybe swing for some fences there. More than anything else.
Sadly sailed this week.
Oh no! How many were you? I saw you had 8 points this week, of which
I think
I
I'm down to 40th now overall. But I think what's absolutely killed me is that I've dropped 3 points because I couldn't get on the website for full 2 days this weekend, which I wasn't best pleased about. Let's put it that way.
Oh, that website is a killer. That it really is a killer, unfortunately. But hey, you've had a really good run. You got to within the top 5 at the end of the regular season. That was summer. That really was something. But yeah, you're still 4 points ahead in terms of winning yourself a hat. So focus on that one, maybe. Put it this way: I'm a full 15 points away from said hat, and so I am actually mathematically out of contention. So it could always be worse, mate. It could always be worse. And yeah, we will leave it there. We won't have a pod next week. We're going to be a little bit more sporadic going forward. We'll come back probably in a fortnight just to sort of check in on the NFL in general, some of the blowback from some of the moves which the Browns are likely to make this week. If you're listening to us today, which is Monday, then you'll know that there is a press conference that the Browns are hosting. Andrew Berry and Kevin Stefanski are giving a joint one just to go through the season at 9:30 UK time. I'm pretty sure you can catch that on Twitter as well, but I'm pretty sure that plus a number of other things will end up being the focus. Oh, and I've just seen a tweet which has come through from Albert Breer saying that the Browns are scheduling an interview with ex-Lions coach Jim Schwartz for their defensive coordinator opening. So on about Jim Schwartz earlier, I think Shaun was. That's another one that's on the list. So yeah, definitely some familiar names going around the carousel. Hopefully, within the next couple of weeks, we might have an idea as to what's going on with that as well. So, yeah, should have more to talk about at that point. Keep following us at Believeland Brit on Twitter, also Believeland Brits podcast on Facebook. Also, our partner channel, Full 10 Yards. We'll be doing podcasts all the way up to the Super Bowl every week, as well as dedicated content throughout. So keep an eye on that. Thank you, everyone, and go Browns.